everyone.
Yes, good to see you.
Right. So my name is Abel. I'm from Kincentric, a global management consulting firm, and I'm very happy to meet all of you. My heartiest congratulations to all of you for being winners of the Kincentric Best Employers Award. The purpose for us here is really to hear from you around, the practices that you have put in place that really, create a positive work culture. Right. So Moksin, we'll start with you. If you were to rate the work culture in AMP today, from 1 to 10, 10 being extremely positive and 1 being poor, how would you rate it?
Work culture is a work in progress, but I think at this point in time, I would rate AMP's work culture to be a 7, and I hope that it can improve and increase this rating. But I think I'm very much certain that everybody else would concur that the number is more dynamic than linear.
All right. So Ivy, over to you.
Well, I like to think rating of culture should be better heard from the team themselves, but I like to think we're around an 8, where we've come a long way, where we've set up certain hygiene practices to adapting them to our own internal culture and able to identify this is our distinct flavor. But then some room for improvement as well, so it's an 8 for me.
Well, I would rate as 11. No, just kidding. But honestly, I think we are probably an 8.
Justin, so if you were to rate the work culture in LCCS, how would you rate it?
Well, I would say probably an 8, and that's because we spend a lot of time working on our workplace relationships. We feel that that's very important for us. It's not that it took us many years to journey together, and we're still on that journey, like Mohsin said. Yeah.
Share with us, right, what that journey looked like, and what worked for you and what you see, could really do.
We often talk about helping our clients to build communities of care and support. So it dawned on us that likewise we needed to have the same in our own community, in our own workplace. We also need to be that community of care for each other. And what that looks like could be, throughout the whole pandemic period, we were kind of disconnected, working from home, and we instituted that every Monday morning we'll have a check-in. So we spend an hour together, we share our responses to fun and interesting questions, and we build connections and relationships that way. But there's also that ritual where we are often affirming each other, and that practice has continued throughout the whole 2 years. And even up till now, we have that protected time, and we're not going to give that up for anything else.
All right. James, over to you. Would you share the journey of Touch, right? How do you get to 8, and where do you see are the areas that Touch could do better?
I think for us, one of the key things that we talk a lot about is about building trust in an organization. Right? So trust is, people talk about it, but it's quite difficult. It's like in a marriage, you are constantly building and pouring into the marriage 365 days a year, 24/7. And without that, it's very difficult to do the rest of the other things, including building a positive work culture. So we strive to work on that on a daily basis, on a regular basis. We emphasize a lot about it. And we recognize that if we can at least build that level of trust and safety net, we would be able to unify an organization. We are close to 400 strong, and that's a lot to try to bring the whole ship together on the journey. But once we can accomplish that, I feel that we would be able to shoot for our vision, and everyone will be aligned in the same direction. So we do a few things from an engagement of employees, where we have a lot more town halls and virtual town halls, especially over the last 2 years. We also empower our staff. So in terms of flex leave, flex benefits, we want them to know that they can take charge, and we encourage them to do that, including their learning and development. The third thing that we do, of course, is recognition. We've been recognizing staff for 5 years, 10 years, all the way to, 30 years this year, in terms of their service with us. And finally, through our engagement survey, which we've been doing once every 2 years, we get to kind of have a sense of what we are doing fine and what we need to work on. So that's our journey.
I think a bit of context, we're pretty young SSA, 19 years. I have only about 22, 23 full-time staff. So that journey of kind of building that people practices was really from scratch. I would say the earlier phases was a lot of adopt, just figuring out what are available policies, practices out there that are good, and then just putting it in place. And I would like to think that in the more recent years, we've been having a bit more fun with adapt, where it's not just blindly taking on new practices or policies that make sense, but we are able to kind of contextualize it to our kind of culture, which is very youthy. I have a lot of Gen Z and millennial staff in the team too, so that's, I think, the process of growing and learning.
Today, I think post-pandemic, for everybody who has struggled through the working arrangements, having to work from home, having to work in a hybrid format. So a lot of these adjustments they had to do. But I think it was great that our human resource and also the senior management and leadership found a way to put in certain effort and did certain actions to ensure that the relationship and the experience of the staff were positive. So among others that we did was, especially during the pandemic, we had virtual catch-ups. The tendency to continue to speak about work when you are on virtual meetings is very high. So sometimes we put in deliberate activities to stay away from those things and to ensure that the managers and the supervisors to spend a bit more time in catching up personally with the staff.
Since you're talking about working relationships, maybe you could share with us, how does effective relationships, right, help, in reinforcing or building a positive work culture in AMP?
Okay. Positive work culture defines our employees' experience. The entire relationship building aspect of it, it's not just about always getting the work done. It's about having to understand what are the key concerns of the staff themselves, and also having a shared vision of what the organization would like to achieve, right? And hence, therefore, coming in the middle to have a conversation and then have an open feedback session. It goes both ways. So I thought this relationship building aspect toward a positive work culture is something that is again dynamic and also something that will always be a work in progress.
I think effective relationships are always very tricky because it's a place with people and people are always dynamic. But I think I would like to think that effective relationships amplify whatever is the prevailing culture within the organization. So if your organization has a pretty strong social culture, I think the effective relationships would amplify that. In a similar way, if you don't have certain good practices, like maybe people are more fearful of confrontation, it probably might be amplified also because we mirror one another in that relationship setting. But I think the part of being able to kind of have that safety net or network beyond just supervisors or looking at the HR personnel or the EDs or the leaders. I think effective relationships have that power that there are more people around to support an individual in that process of growing as an employee and as a social service practitioner.
So one of the things I do to build trust as a CEO is I have this one-on-one session with my direct reports and then with small groups of younger managers. And I start by sharing about my aspiration. I open up the conversation about my personal life, and I get to also talk about work, of course. And in the course of it, my whole intention is to get them to feel that this openness and transparency that I exhibit is something that they can carry with them, with the rest of their staff. I think it's important to use very informal sessions to try to share and open up our lives and be vulnerable to people. And in the way, it kind of built trust actually within the staff. So, if my head of organization, my senior leadership is able to share and is able to open up their life, then I should be doing the same. And so that's one element which we do, or which I do, and which I hope to impart to the rest.
I think that effective is different from good relationships. To have good relationships, we just need to be really nice. But effective, then the word comes to mind is how we can respectfully challenge one another in the context of, because this is good for us, because this is good for the people that we serve. And sometimes in practice, that could be asking each other tough questions, asking each other questions that help us to think a little bit further about the rationale of why we do what we do. And sometimes even having vulnerable conversations with one another at the workplace to assess whether, to what extent our work is making an impact.
How do you get your staff to own this process of sustaining and building positive relationships with each other in LCCS?
Right. So ownership is very big for us at LCCS. So even when we talked about what matters to us, the staff came together and we designed 7 working principles. We call this the 7 principles for practice. And so the fact that they built the principles together, they articulated what it meant. An example of one of them is willing participation. So the idea of willing participation is helping to explain to people that we work with why their participation matters, to help people to understand the value that it brings to you. So likewise at the workplace, if a colleague has to go to another colleague for help, maybe to get you involved to be part of a project team, then the principle of willing participation means that they literally need to have that conversation to say, let me tell you more about what this is, let me tell you why it matters to LCCS or why it matters for the work that we do, and you make your decision after you listen to that conversation.
So trying to build sustainability itself is a big challenge. I don't have that kind of framework we can all use some good practices, but I personally feel that it's important to be able to hold open conversation, including people who may completely disagree with your views. And that is very much necessary for us to journey together and bring everyone on the journey. And it's not all the time that people have to be, completely in agreement with you. We can agree to disagree, but importantly, we recognize that finally, after we make a decision, and they can trust the leadership and say, okay, we're going to run this race together. Even though there are 5 different opinions, right, we will still run the race. We submit to the leadership. If we fail, we fail together. If we do well, we all we glory together.
I know the word accountability may sound a bit discipline-ish or a bit scary sometimes, but I think at EMP we try to hold each other accountable, whether it is right from the junior staff to senior staff as well. The entire idea is when we are accountable to the roles that we play, then perhaps our organization will be better for it in terms of understanding where we are in our performance-wise, but at the same time, the welfare of the staff. Yeah.
To some extent, it's easy for us because we actually don't have a full-time HR person. We'll always describe it as we have different people performing the HR function. So what we are very intentional to do is to create space or avenues where the staff can come up with ideas that can serve their peers. They sometimes pour their attention into how can we create an environment or pay forward the kind of people practices that they have received for a younger person. And the environment that we're trying to create is just, if you have an idea that it's worthy to bring up, do so. And not all of us will just come together and kind of figure out how this could be an effective way to strengthen how we want to sow into young people that we get to serve.
All right. And one more last question. If you were to look at the social service sector, what do you hope or vision, right, in terms of people engagement?
I think social services is always about the people. So I do hope that the social service agencies at Singapore can be good role models in the way that we manage our human resources and eventually to become good examples for other organizations and companies out there in the area of positive work culture.
I'll kind of see social service sector as including all the practitioners, you and I in the room. And I feel like one part of the domain of people practices is to look at extrinsic work that we could, focus on making sure there's flexible work arrangement, making sure the environments are conducive, psychological safety. But I think my real hope is that practitioners like ourselves also have that space and grace to give ourselves self-care and learn the process of being more reflective. At the end of the day, we're here for a long haul. I like to see it that way. And so it's important to also strengthen the intrinsic ability to be resilient and be able to grow in that journey.
Well, I think we work with a lot of broken people and individuals and families. And one of the key trusts that we have at LCCS is breaking the hurt cycle. So my hope for the sector is that we can even break incidences of hurt. When we work with each other in close proximity at the workplace, there will be conflicts that happen. And my hope is to have space for people to be able to have these conversations, to be restored individuals themselves, to experience it, because that's really through the context of relationships and healing that's where we grow. On the contrary, if we don't have space to do that within our organizations and people end up leaving on a bad note, that individual actually moves on to another workplace and carries on that practice or continues to be defensive, and that's not going to be helpful. So my hope is for us in the sector to be places of restoration.
We are in the people business, so people engagement is actually very fundamental to the success of this sector. Having those very difficult conversations, calling out the elephant in the room, it's always been a challenge. And getting people to say, hey, actually these are things that we need to get rid of, perhaps we need to look at things in a new way. I think it's very important if we're going to progress as a sector, and if we can be comfortable and open to have those conversations, I feel that the sector will be able to make more informed, more correct decisions for us to progress further. So I hope that especially the elephant in the room is something that as a sector we need to address, and we need to be able to do that with that sense of not feeling judged or feeling that we are just trying to undermine someone else. So I hope that's something that the sector can do and have more conversations around it and be mature enough to say, hey, let's talk about the real issues and let's find a way to serve the community and move forward together.
All right. Thank you so much for your sharing. I'm sure that the audience in the restorative conference will benefit from the practical tips that all of you shared. At Kincentric, we really want to give the recognition of agencies, social service agencies like yours in establishing wonderful, excellent people practices that reinforces positive work cultures. So thank you very much once again.